just make sure, because I'm the technician here as well, Paul. So let me just.
Marvelous. Well, I'll leave all that to you, sir. I tell you.
Yeah, well, that's a risky game. Yeah, like I said, I put on multiple hats, but yeah, I think we're good. We're live, and yeah, mate, let's talk. Firstly, thank you for joining me. I'm excited. I haven't done a podcast for about 2 months because I've been away. So I love speaking to people. So I'm excited to do this, and also I'm excited to be picking your brains after reading SUMO, Shut Up, Move On, and stalking your Instagram profiles and your Facebook profiles. So yeah, firstly, just thank you for being here. So Paul, author of SUMO, Yes, Happiness Revolution, How to Succeed with People, How to Have a Great Life, How to Speak So People Really Listen, How Not to Worry, which has sold over 50,000 copies, so clearly a very popular one, and Self-Confidence. So clearly there's a theme there that you enjoy helping people make the most out of life and succeed in. Has there been a time in your life where the exact opposite has been present in what you've experienced? So where you haven't been making the most out of life, where you've been worrying too much? Has your work kind of come from an area where that hasn't been present?
I think it's a great question, Alex, and morning to you, and it's great to be with you. I think without going into masses of detail, let's just say the phrase dysfunctional describes my childhood. 4 father figures in my life by the age of 9, and I actually physically run away from home at the age of 10. I'm still in primary school and I'm running away from home. You don't do that unless there's some serious stuff, let's use the word stuff, going on in your life. And through my teenage years, it was quite troubled. And then through a mixture of a lot of different things, I was always fascinated in people. And I suppose I always had an interest, although I didn't realize at the time, but I suppose in psychology. And over time, I suppose in my, I lost my job through ill health in my early 20s. I became ill with this illness called ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, or the Daily Mail like to call it just yuppie flu. A lot of stuff going on. And brought up in a household where I had an incredibly loving mother, but anxiety was just like the name of the game for all kinds of reasons, and witnessed some stuff in the family home that just wasn't great. So I guess I didn't get into personal development because from a position of comfort and ease and joy, I came from it almost like from a desperate need for help. And what I began to find, Alex, is that over the years, I began to think, well, this has helped me, and this has helped me, and changing my mindset about this. And I just had this insatiable hunger to learn, which I never really had at school. And then it just came a point where I thought, you know what? It seems to be helping me. Maybe it could help other people as well. So, yeah, it came from a position of lack rather than from a position of wealth, I guess, how I got into this kind of like material to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's quite common, isn't it? So for my story's fairly similar. I hit a low point, which made me change the way that I lived my life. It almost wasn't an option. Was there a point for you where that also occurred, where it was like, well, I can't carry on running away. I can't carry on living like this. So I'm going to spend my time in learning how to make my life better. Was there a specific point that tipped you over that edge, or was it, or did it just come organically?
No, things definitely turned around for me in my late teens, and I went off to university, ultimately met my wife. And I developed, I would call, my faith developed as well to some extent. So although I would call, life isn't a case of split into 2 very easy camps, either life's terrible or it's great. It's a spectrum. And sometimes it's like, I'm taking a train later down to London, and those parallel tracks, if you want to think of the metaphor that one of those tracks can be full of lots of struggles, and the other is also a track where there's lots of success and good stuff, and they go in tandem, they're parallel. So even in my tough times, there was still good times as well. But I suppose losing my job through ill health, that was a particularly low point. And someone lent me a set of motivational cassette tapes, as they were then, by a guy who's now passed away called Richard Denny, who was like a sales trainer and a bit of a motivational speaker. And I can't remember anything on those tapes apart from a phrase, which I'll paraphrase, which is, within every adversity, there is a seed of equal or greater opportunity. And I'm thinking, well, I've got this adversity. I'm ill. I've lost my job through ill health. 8 out of 10 doctors don't believe it's a genuine illness. I meet someone who's had it for 10 years and is in a wheelchair. But I clung on to partly that quote: within every adversity, there's a seed of equal or greater opportunity. Something good could come from this. And I think, my friends, my people from a faith community, and above all, my wife and my close family, they also were my rock in the midst of all this, most definitely.
So when you talk about adversity then, so with your illness, for example, that was kind of forced upon you. If a guy's sitting out there now and he's listening to this and he doesn't feel like there's much adversity in his life, or he's not really struggling with anything, but he's comfortable, he's not happy, there's no real reason to go out there and push. Would you encourage somebody to then search for it? So put themselves in position of adversity so that they learn, so that they find their opportunity? Because whenever we look at all the best things in life, right, they come with a certain amount of struggle and challenge and effort, don't they? So would you encourage that we actively go looking for uncomfortable situations?
I think it's an interesting one, Alex, because ultimately, we talk about men, and I realise, it's the Better Man podcast, but there's over nearly 3.25 billion men on the planet. And we're all unique. We've all got our unique stories and our unique journeys and our temperaments. So I don't want to generalize too much. I mean, for a lot of people, they do get into this personal development space because maybe they have reached some kind of crisis in their lives. Others, it becomes maybe when they get into their late 30s or 40s and suddenly look around and go, is this it? And they talk about the concept later on in life, maybe of the midlife crisis. But I also want to emphasize, you don't have to be ill to get better. You can always improve. So I don't think you necessarily, let's seek out adversity because that's going to shape me. Yeah, struggles can strengthen you. That's one of the quotes I use in one of my books. But I think sometimes it's just, what is SUMO? So I'm known as the SUMO guy. And the SUMO stands for, and the title of the book, shut up, move on. And what the shut up means is take a bit of time out, press pause, stop, think, reflect. Realize you're doing a lot of stuff on autopilot without thinking, and just give yourself, you take the car in for a service. Well, sometimes the car's running okay, but you still take it in for a service. And I think we should regularly take our minds in for a bit of a service, for a bit of a once over, or take our lives in for a once over. And not because we're struggling and life's terrible and the wheels falling off. But let's just let's realize that there's a privilege to be on this planet. It's an awesome opportunity. And are we making the most of it? And perhaps you come to that place because of a struggle and a change and a challenge, or a divorce, or a setback at work, or with your health. But sometimes you are just drifting along quite comfortably. Great. But often there's more to life than we sometimes appreciate. And I think at times we do need to just wake up and get off autopilot. But how we get there are many different directions, and we're all on different journeys.
Yeah, I love that analogy. So a couple of things there. Like, what is a midlife crisis? So I'd love to talk more about this because a lot of the guys that I work with are in their 30s and 40s. So I'd love to talk about this a little bit more. And then how do we ever know whether we're making the most out of life? So I know these are two separate questions. So we'll look at the first one.
Okay, well, the first one, I mean, again, is it a myth? Who knows about the midlife crisis? But there is something that they reckon. You see, women go through the menopause. So there is this biological change in women that impacts them physically and emotionally. Now, I forget what the phrase is, but men, they reckon, can go through something similar. And men might see a decrease in their testosterone levels, and they might just all of a sudden, it's like, you're in your 20s, your late teens, your 20s, you're going to change the world, you're going to do this, you're dreaming about that, then you settle down. And you know what can be a struggle sometimes for guys is if you're in a relationship and you start a family, perhaps with your partner, and I realize that we might be in all kinds of different relationships. So you either have a child, or you adopt a child, but all of a sudden you find that you might have felt like you were the center of that other person's world. And now, although you might be thrilled to be a father, you realize that the person, your partner, has now devoted a lot of their attention and their care to someone else, to this little boy, this little girl. And that can impact your sleep, the way you do life together. And sometimes men can feel even pushed out because everything's about the kids in some cases. And you don't feel you get the attention or the affirmation that you actually sometimes as a guy want. And that can lead to us if we're not careful. And as you get older in life, and maybe whatever age your kids are, if you have kids, but even if you don't have kids, you can just get to the point of suddenly thinking, when I was young, I was invincible. I'm going to live forever. And I'm now nearly 58. Well, when I was about 16, if I met someone who was 70, they were flippin' ancient. If I meet someone who's 70 now, who's an old age pensioner, I'm 12 years off that age. And I think what can happen in a midlife crisis, if you want to use that phrase, is a lot of different things happening with men biologically and also their sense of identity. And you can get to that point of thinking, so is this it? What is the meaning and the purpose of my life? Because maybe I've settled into a particular job or a particular role, and the most exciting thing I do at the weekends is go to IKEA in the garden centre, and we're at another play centre with the kids, and that's all valid. I like my garden centres. I'm actually DIY intolerant, so I never go to IKEA. But and hopefully I'll have grandchildren at some stage, and I'll be thrilled to go to a ballpark or whatever they call it with the kids. But it can start to get men thinking, is this it? Have I wasted my life? Are the best years behind me? So that's what I kind of mean by a midlife crisis that can start to occur. And crisis is often viewed very negatively. But I think the Greek word for crisis just means decision. And it's about, maybe I need to make some decisions about what I want to do the rest of my life. I'll answer your second question, Alex, if I could flipping well remember what it was, but I can't.
No worries. Well, do you know what? I'm going to hold you here for a minute because I'm quite interested in this topic. So I think, so I'll be 38 this year. Like you've already mentioned, things start changing, like physically as well. Like, your hair might start to fall out, your testosterone levels start to diminish a little bit. Your drive, your ambition might start to shrink as well a little bit. So I think there's a part of a man that sees himself not as fit and healthy as he was when he was in his 20s, which again is another reminder that, we're edging closer to the end. I think you only start to think about this in your late 30s and your early 40s. And then that big question of like, yeah, shit, like, have I been on the right path for my life? Am I on the right path? Is this it? Do you think this is probably the best time for a guy to revise where he's at and what he's doing, because there's time to correct? So if you're 70 years old and you look back and you're full of regret, you could argue, look, it's too late, or you've got very few years to try and course correct any of this. But for a guy in his 30s and 40s, do you think that it's a sign or a signal that you need to pay attention to something, or do you just think it's an evolutionary process that every single man is going to experience?
I think, well, first of all, whatever your age, don't so much count your days, but make your days count. I think that's a crucial thing to be aware of. Clearly, if you're in your 30s and 40s as opposed to your 70s, you could argue you've got time to change, to evolve, to develop, but even, if you had someone who's listening to this or watching this, and I'm going, well, I'm probably 72, so too late for me. Who knows? Your best years could still be ahead of you. I mean, we live in a very ageist society where we think that actually it's only the young guns that can really make things happen. And I'm inspired. I've got a number of friends who are in their 70s, and they are phenomenal people. So again, for me, it's like whatever your age is, let's just first of all wake up, smell the flipping coffee. There's only Homo sapiens as a species. There's only about 100 billion in total Homo sapiens ever walked this planet, and you're one of them. You're one of them. And there's never been, but despite what we're talking about, Brexit, Ukraine, pandemic, there has never, ever been a better time to be alive on this planet. Despite all the challenges and struggles we may have, trust me, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, flippin' heck. You know, we live like royalty. The people, the kings and queens of the 18th, 19th century wouldn't have anything like the luxuries we've got now, even if we're on a low income. So it's a flipping privilege. And if you've got your health, then, whoa, okay, so what do I want to do? Spend all my time moaning about what I don't have, or actually start to appreciate what I do have? And then think, okay, what do I appreciate? Well, I appreciate the fact we've got the technology to do this. That when I had a shower this morning, and I thought I would do, I like to do it at least once a week, especially when I'm talking to someone like you, Alex. But I turn on a handle, I flip in while it's hot water. You know, I've worked in the largest slum area in the whole of Africa. It's in Kenya. It's a place called Kibera, just outside of Nairobi. You know, when I went to the loo this morning, I flushed my toilet and I don't have to think about anything else. In Kibera, completely different story. You know, in Kibera, they sell toothpaste on a daily basis because people can't always afford a tube of it. So I'm just kind of not making people feel guilty. Just going, you've got a wonderful life. You might not know it. You've got a wonderful life. You're 30, you're 40, you're 50, you're 60, you're 70. Life is amazing. It's a flipping miracle we're even here. So let's stop, understand how amazing this privilege called life is, and ask yourself, can I make the most of it? And I think I've gone back to the question, how do you know you're making the most of it? Well, it's not about, I don't know, I've got a target. Have I made it or haven't I? I think it's about thinking about the ABC. You know, if you can do ABC every day, then I think you're beginning to make the most out of life. And the A is simply this: just stop and appreciate all that you actually have. Now, people sort of call it gratitude, thankfulness, but just appreciate it. Just take a little bit of a moment to appreciate it. The B is about be kind to yourself and others. You know, we're all going through our challenges and our struggles at times. We're all flawed, we're all fragile, we're also fantastic. And lots of things have shaped and influenced how we are. So be kind to yourself, but maybe try and be kind to other people. We're living in a cancel culture. We're living in a culture where people, if they don't, you're happy to be tolerant with people as long as they think like you do. But if they don't, then you want to cancel them and shut them up. Well, maybe try and be a bit more curious and kind as to where they're coming from. So appreciation, be kind to yourself and others. And the C is about connection. And I think, you know, let's be honest, and maybe part of what's motivated this podcast is men at times have, generally speaking, done life a bit differently to women. And, you know, I remember I'd go to a football match. I go regularly to watch a team who I was following at the time, Bradford City. And I was living in Warrington with a mate who was from Warrington. He was originally from Bradford, living in Warrington. And we'd commute over. I mean, we're in the car for nearly 3 hours going there and back to the game. We sit and watch the game. And then we've been doing that for nearly a season. And I just said to him, hey, how about you and, well, use the woman's name. I'll just use a fictitious name. How about you and Claire come over for dinner? And he went, didn't I tell you we're getting divorced? I went, how long's this been the case, mate? He said, oh, well, probably for the last year or so. And I'm thinking, we've travelled together once a week, once a fortnight to watch a football match, spend 3 hours in the car. You've never mentioned about your struggles in your marriage. And I think connection, and sometimes being, you know, yeah, you connect by having a drink, playing pool, watching sport, playing sport. Great, it's very important. But maybe sometimes connection is about just checking in with people and seeing how you are. And so appreciate, be kind to yourself and others. And connection is crucial. And I think you put those 3 things together and you're going, am I making the most of today? Well, it's a very subjective question, isn't it? But if you do those 3 things, and there's a good chance you will be making the most of today.
Yeah, that story you've just told of your friend in the car, that's so typical of men and how we communicate nowadays. So I know that I've got friends that I can reach out to, Paul, if I'm struggling. If I'm honest, am I going to? Probably not. Not until I absolutely need to. So whether that again is biological and that's the way we are, I don't know. I'm sure there's ways to break that down. But going back to the gratitude part, I always find a couple of things. Like my gratitude always increases when I put myself in adversity. Like it just does. If life is too comfortable for me, I can easily start taking it for granted. I start to forget how good I've got things. So one of the reasons I like to do the challenges, charity events, it reminds me. So I can write gratitude down, or I can experience it by making my life not always as comfortable as it needs to be.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing. And when you put a group of guys together who are in a joint challenge or an obstacle, and they have to work together. So if you look at footballers, for example, I know you've kind of experienced working around professional footballers as well.
Yeah.
Those guys, like when they score, they hug each other, they slap each other on the arse. They're doing all the kind of things that you would not do, not on a football pitch. So again, it's kind of like the answers are there for us, aren't they? If you can get a team of guys together to work on challenges, to go through struggle, hardship, team effort, I think for me, that's a more realistic way of getting guys to bond and communicate versus just sitting and talk.
Yeah, no, I get that totally, and I mean we are wired a bit differently, and I think sometimes what can happen is because it's interesting you say about people on the pitch hugging each other, but if you're an Everton fan, which I'm not, but if you saw some of their fans last night, they're doing plenty of hugging and dancing and jigging as well, and sometimes it's the fans. So I understand how coming together. I mean, you keep on using the word adversity. Fine. I like to think about it as a challenge, but it can bring purpose. It can get you out of your comfort zone. It can break you out of complacency. And then when you start to do that with other people, with other guys, then there is that opportunity to break down some barriers, and you may start to open up a little bit more about certain things as well. But I understand that the whole thing around challenge particularly is important. Where do life's opportunities really lie is a question I ask in my SUMO book. Where do life's opportunities really lie? Inside or outside your comfort zone? Well, they're often the very outside your comfort zone. And that's where you grow. Change is inevitable, but growing is optional. So I totally get on board with what you're saying about challenge. It's just you've got this flipping love of the word adversity, and Alex, I'm not as keen on that. Although some of supporting Bradford City and Wigan Athletic has brought me plenty of adversity over the years, particularly Bradford. But let's shut up and move on from that one.
And I mean challenge and obstacle. I think we started off on that topic is just kind of a word that's light bulbing in my head. But one of the pushbacks I have, or one of the challenges that a lot of the guys that I work with face, is this whole battle between they're not polars, but I think we can view them as polars, as gratitude and ambition. So it's like, how do I continuously strive and make the most out of my time, my days, my life, whilst being I'll use the word content, grateful for what I have. How do I appreciate all that while still being driven? Because whilst I'm being driven and focusing on that, I can't really focus on what I've got. When I focus on what I've got, I can't really spend my time pushing and creating new things. How do you help people manage the balance of this?
It's interesting because, again, it's like, I think we see it as an either or. And one of the things about life I've learned is make peace with paradox. So two things can be the opposite to each other, but they could both be true. So there's even this quote, out of sight, out of mind. And there's another phrase that goes, absence makes the heart grow fonder, which is right. Well, they could both be right at times, couldn't they? Is it possible that I can still want to have a sense of drive? I mean, I'm very I say I'm fortunate. I've worked flipping hard for this and I've had a lot of support. I've been running my business for 31 years. My financial advisor said to me recently, Paul, if you want to just downsize a little bit, you don't have to work again the rest of your life. You're financially comfortable. You can live well. Now, every day I start off with my thankful for four things that happened the day before that I'm thankful and grateful for. Every night I think about that as well. So I can be thankful. I can go, I don't need to work. But I'm just commissioned the guy's going to do some filming with me, and we're gonna launch onto TikTok, do loads of videos on there. I've already commissioned him that we're going to film 60 videos. I'm going to be putting some on Instagram. We'll put some of them on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. And you're like, I don't need to work again. Financially, I probably don't need to work again. I am very thankful for loads of things, and I am still determined to want to get some of the good stuff that I believe I have learned along the way from loads of other people, as well as develop some myself, but I've learned a lot from other people. And maybe I've got a slightly interesting, unique style and approach on how I communicate that material. I am putting that out into the world, and I'm driven and I'm ambitious, not as to, I haven't got a target for followers. I mean, I don't have any followers on TikTok. I've never posted a video. But I'm not ambitious as to, well, how do I grow my base? How do I grow my following? But I am ambitious to think, I've got some God-given potential. We all have. Am I using it for that to benefit other people? And I am thankful, and I'm still ambitious. I am still driven. So it's not either or, it's and both. You can have both. So make peace with paradox, if I could say it, make peace with paradox. You can appreciate. You don't have to spend 3 hours thinking about what you're thankful for, but it's like, if you woke up feeling tired and miserable, you woke up. Great. So come on, savor the day and seize the day and be grateful for the day. You can do it all in terms of appreciation and being driven. It's not a case of, oh, well, if I'm showing gratitude, I obviously can't be ambitious. Of course you flipping can. You got a guy from Manchester, currently living in Warrington, who's a demonstration of that. So get on with it. Do both.
I can see why they call you the SUMO guy now.
Go on, what do you mean by that?
I can see why. Yeah, it's that's how it is, right? When we're talking about these skills, I'm a big fan of rituals, routines. So the way that I would conduct this and how I encourage my guys is to, as you use the word, slow down at the start, and I think that's massively important to slow down. And it's just a quick 2 or 3 minute drill where I will write down what I'm grateful for, therefore putting more attention on it. Because if I do the whole, I'm going to think in the morning of what's important to me, I'll forget that. I'll get up, I'll rush on with my day. So I like to slow things down purposely, and have certain rules in place, like no social media for the first 2 hours. Read, go for a walk, get some fresh air, and do my journal. Do you have any specific rituals, daily routines that you can share with any of my listeners that might help them set up their day to be more productive and to help them appreciate what they've got in their life whilst being ambitious?
Yeah, absolutely. One, I would just thoroughly endorse the importance of routines and rituals. I often say it's easy, if we're not careful, to live life on autopilot with a sense of entitlement. When I'm encouraging people, live intentionally with a sense of awe. And so my morning ritual, I don't get out of bed until I have done my thankful for. So I will go through the day, the previous day. And again, I did it last thing at night, and I'm doing it first thing in the morning. So I'm replaying my day. I'm thinking about that breakfast I had with my mate Richard yesterday morning, that 2 hours flew by. I'm thinking about that virtual event I did for the NHS. I'm thinking about the lovely meal I had. I'm thinking about the finishing and finally watching the Ozark series. There are lots of little things. So before I get out of bed, I've started the day with a mindset of gratitude. Like you, I'm going to do a lot of different things before I pick up my phone. The first things I do, the first 5 minutes, I'm doing some physical exercise. More call it stretching. So I start by doing the plank. I don't know what the technical term for the next thing I do is, but I'm doing quite a bit of stretching. And that's just 5 minutes. And so within the first few minutes of me waking up, I've already done some gratitude and thinking and reflecting. I've already done a little bit of the physical. I have a time of silence and solitude. I wake up earlier than my wife. I'm glad of that. So after I fed the cats and cleared the litter tray, I am down, pen, paper, reading and reflecting. What I've already done today, I've already been on a walk past about an hour and 15 minutes. I have, you know, I don't have an Apple Watch, but I got something cheap off Amazon. That's telling me I've already done 10,500 steps today. My goal is always to be, I have this little concept called podium goals. So 10,000 steps a day is bronze, 15,000 is silver, 20,000 is gold. And every day since I was ill with the COVID-19 virus in March 2020, after I got well, every single day I've made the podium. So I have this little goal as well around my physical exercise, and that's always going to involve also being outside. They have this little phrase called, you know, you talk about getting your vitamin D from sunlight. Well, vitamin N is like vitamin nature. And so for me, that's really important. And I will listen to a podcast. Sometimes it's about my development, and I'm listening to kinds of people who are talking about neuroscience and psychology and relationships and mindset. This morning, it's a Friday. I've done a lot of feeding my mind with some great stuff. I was listening to a football podcast and thoroughly enjoyed it. So, yes, here's a phrase for you. There's a Shakespeare play called All's Well That Ends Well. It's kind of become a phrase we use in the common vernacular. Well, how about this? All's well that starts well. Master your mornings. You know, by the time I've done my stretching exercises, we're less than 10 minutes into the day, but I've taken some control over how I start my day. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of a flavour what this 58-year-old nearly bloke up north is doing.
Yeah, no, I think it's got. I love the podium concept. I think that's great. I've never heard that actually. I think that's fantastic.
Well, I made it up, and the reason I made it up, Alex, is partly because if you set yourself a goal of 20,000 and you don't do it, you feel a bit of a failure. But if you kind of go, my goal, you know, bronze, silver, and gold, then I just think, well, fine, I've hit 10. I mean, I'm going to probably get close to 20 by the time I crash out tonight. But I've already got my 10 done. I'm on the podium. The goal is make the podium every day.
I love it. One of the reasons I write my gratitude list down and my wins down. So I do a lot of this, you know, gratitude and wins, you know, what am I grateful for? And then at the end of the day, look, what's gone well? I like to look back. So I always find some of these wins, one, you don't locate them unless you look for them. So it actively makes me, you know, reverse engineer my day and say, right, well, what's from the moment I got up, what's happened? And I try and think of some achievements and just some small things like it might be a nice text or something I've done that's nice. But I really like to record these by writing them so that I can have all this information. And on the days where I feel like I'm not doing well, or I feel like a piece of shit, or I feel like you know, everything's a failure, I've got all this information that says, actually, Alex, you're doing all right. Because the brain can trigger us, can't it? It can tell us that, you know, we're not doing great, we're a failure, especially if we've got the world of comparison now, which on social media is quite an easy world to dive into. Do you find that there's you know, the fact that you just do this with thoughts that you can lose them? Like a good idea, if you don't write it down, you might lose it forever.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I don't write down my thankful for. What I do on a Sunday is I reflect on the whole week and I just journal. And it's not about always just what I did, but it's all the good stuff I did that I'm thankful for. And I will reread that throughout the year. But certainly if you've got an idea or a thought, or I'm thinking about a metaphor or a quote comes to mind, and I'm thinking, oh, I just need to capture that. So that's important to capture, because it is interesting. You can say, we're very good at remembering our failures. You know, I came across this quote that said, you know, you carve your failures in concrete, but you write your successes in sand. So I understand why sometimes reminding yourself, having almost like your victory log, if you like, of certain things that you've achieved, because we do take what we've done for granted. I take for granted what I've done. It's interesting, when work that I do hardly anything now, but for 5 years, I was very involved with Manchester City. And then for a further 5 years, even after they set up their own psychology department, I still got involved in doing ad hoc work with them. But when I was working, almost going in once or twice a week, I remember the players, these multi-million-pound footballers, weren't as impressed by other footballers, because it's like, well, that's what they do. You've got a talent, they've got a talent. Strangely enough, I remember they had a little library at City in their old training ground. It was actually all of my books. I remember one of the players going, I reckon my girlfriend would really love this book. And I went, would you like me to sign it for her? And it's like, you'd sign my book? And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And it's going, oh, that would be amazing. And then you're a Sunday Times best-selling author. Oh my. And it was like this, and I'm taking that for granted, but they're almost taking their ability as elite sports people and Premier League footballers for granted. So it's easy, isn't it? But maybe we don't want to dwell too much on our successes, because for me, I want to appreciate what I've done, appreciate who's helped me get there, but then what's next? So yeah, there's a few thoughts to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it always amazes me if I say to, the guys, especially who I start working with, look, at the end of each day, we're going to locate 5 good things that have happened to you or 5 wins. And at first, it's a real challenge. But what I've noticed is that these things are trainable skills. So if you can't find any wins, what it does is, or what it did for me especially, was it makes me go out and create them. So if I can't find them, I either need to look harder, or I need to go and create wins in my day. Because you've used the word autopilot a couple of times now. It's so true, isn't it? We're often always on that, where we get up, we do our thing, and before we know it, it's the end of the day, and boom, another day's gone. And if we question what we've actually done that day or achieved or anything, it can feel like time is passing quite quickly and autopilot hits. So when you talk about,
can I just, sorry, no, I am talking over and I do apologise.
No.
Not to, but can I just say also, it's like when you look for your wins, it also depends on what you think by the word. What's your definition of win? Because there's a quote, and it's not mine, and I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of this, your viewers. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. So, what's your wins? What's your learnings from today?
Yeah, but the
Even if you've had a bad day, well, what have you learned? Well, I've learned that if I start off this way and I go straight on social media and spend too much time on Instagram and doom scrolling on Twitter, and only do things if I feel motivated rather than out of discipline and habit, I've learned that I won't achieve all I set out to achieve. Fantastic. You've learned something. So what are you going to do differently next time? So even if you can't identify a win, invariably you can identify a learn.
There's definitely wins in there for everyone. So a win could be closely linked with gratitude. If you've woken up in a warm bed, right, that could be a win for the day.
Totally.
Yeah, and it makes you look at this. This is, I remember working with a lady who was struggling to come up with 5 wins, and I pressured her quite hard, and we come up with 25 for that day.
Yeah.
Just traced it back. But like I say, we very rarely stop, go back and think about what a day is. We often have interactions with people that can be classed as huge wins. Nice words said, nice text exchanged, love shown, kindness given, kindness taken. So I think it's there. It's just a skill. And I think the more you do this every day, you become aware of it and you look for it. And whilst you're finding the wins, you're not looking at all the bad things that are occurring in life. It just doesn't happen. You can't find a win and a loss always in the same second. So your book, How Not to Worry, at the point of my research, had sold over 50,000 copies, which is a lot. So it's clearly jumping out at people. What do you think the main reason or thing that people actually worry about in this life is? Is there a common theme?
That's an interesting question. I think partly the reason why all my books have sold well, I mean, that's not my best-selling book by a long way. SUMO and Self-Confidence have sold a lot more. But I think anyway that I think one of the things I talk about is to make my message sticky and memorable and accessible. So I think you don't have to have a PhD in psychology to work through my book, to understand my book. So I'm very much into let's make things accessible and make them practical. And also I use a lot of stories. In terms of what we worry about, I think most of us are worried clearly about the future in terms of what that looks like. But the future might not be what's going to happen in 5 years, but what's going to happen in 5 minutes. So there's a term for that called anticipatory stress, where the event hasn't even happened, but you're worrying about it. And we have this inbuilt negativity bias. So when we're worried, we often think of what's going to go wrong rather than imagine something going right. I think for a lot of people, health is a worry for people. And in my experience, also, if you're a parent, then worrying about children as well. And I'm not saying don't worry, because I actually have this phrase, worth it worry and worthless worry. So, for instance, I haven't, but if I had a little lump on my neck, unusual, don't remember that. You can get your positive, happy, clappy person go, oh, it's probably nothing, just a bit of a swollen gland. I won't worry about it. But if my worrying is a catalyst to me taking action, to make an appointment, to see the doctor, then that's worth it. Worry. If I'm going to train to London later, if I'm concerned as we're driving to the station that the traffic's going to be bad on a Friday, well, don't worry, I'm sure it'll be fine. No. I'm a little bit worried that we might miss our train. So I'm going to leave 10 or 15 minutes earlier than I needed to. That's worth it worry. The worry is a catalyst for you to taking some kind of action. But if I'm then worried, what if the train isn't on time? What if it's delayed? What if it breaks down on the way to London? Yeah, well, that's worthless worry because it's out of your control. And so what I do with people is very much talk about we have to accept there are things that concern us are out of our control. But there's loads of things, what I call your green zone, that little zone of influence and control where you can go, well, I can focus on that, can't I? So life is actually learning. We love to be in control, but actually you can't be in control all the time. So accept you're not general manager of the universe. However, don't spend all your time thinking about, talking about, and worrying about stuff you can't do anything about, because that's taking not just up your time, but your energy. So start to focus on what you can do rather than what you can't do. So health and family and just general things about the future are three big worries for people.
Yeah, and that makes sense what you've just said. Like, can you attach an action to the worry? What kind of things do you catch yourself mindlessly worrying about?
I don't generally. I can get a little bit anxious about, am I going to be on time? But that's almost, anxiety is almost an emotional feeling that I have. So I suppose it's linked with worry. But the thing, so I will sometimes think, what if I'm driving to an event and I can't find the venue, or I'm just severely delayed? So it's more about getting to places on time where it can create a little bit of anxiety occasionally. But I'm not a person who is generally worried about things.
And what area of your life did you have to shut up and move on the most? So was there an area or time in your life where you've really had to use that principle yourself, the SUMO principle? I'm guessing that was born out of something, right?
I told you about my dysfunctional childhood. You know what can happen when you've had a dysfunctional childhood, or you've had a major setback in your life, or you've had a health issue? It's easy to wear the victim t-shirt. And I think for several years, I was comfortable wearing the victim t-shirt. And there came a point where you think, okay, just because that happened, what do you want to be? Do you want to see yourself as a victim or as a survivor? Do you want to become someone who constantly goes, I could have made something with my life if I hadn't had that happen in my childhood, I hadn't lost my job through ill health, through ME, chronic fatigue syndrome. You're just going to keep looking, so I think for me, it was I felt quite comfortable in the role of wanting to be a victim. And you get attention and can't believe that happened. What? You suddenly used to have to, you had Christmas dinner on your own as a kid. You had your meal on your own. Your stepfather hated you so much that he physically couldn't be in your presence. So you had your meals given to you by your mum on a tray that you took up into your bedroom and you ate on your own for several years. Yeah. But that was, I left home at 17. I'm nearly 58. It's 40 years ago, Paul. Learn from the past, don't live there. Shut up. Move on. So, to retell is to relive isn't always helpful. So be thankful for what you have got. Be thankful for what you've learned. Be thankful for maybe the person you've become as a result of that childhood. But the t-shirt doesn't suit you, mate. You're not a victim. You're a survivor, and you can become a thriver. So that's where I needed to shut up and move on.
Mm. What made you decide that you'd stop being a victim?
I think it was that recognition that you don't get the most out of life, do you, just wearing the victim t-shirt? And it's like, well, fair enough. And I think people can get bored of your victimhood. And, you know, it's not fair. And I mean, my book for kids came out in October 2020, right? Yes. I'm passionate about this book and how it can help kids. Loads of great illustrations, content. It just worked relentlessly, not just on the content, but the research and with the illustrator. The book's coming out in October 2020. WH Smiths have stocked my books before. They've made some of my books Business Book of the Month, etc., etc. They decide not to stock this book. The buyers think it looks brilliant. The buyers love the content, but they're not going to stock the book. Why? Because at more or less the same time as that book's about to come out, a book by Gareth Southgate, England football manager, is also coming out, aimed at kids. Chris Hoy, the former Olympic gold medalist cyclist, thighs like tree trunks, got a book coming out a week before mine, aimed at kids. WH Smiths are basically probably saying, you know, your book's flipping amazing, but someone goes into a bookstore, into a railway airport, a WH Smith's branch. Gareth Southgate, celebrity. Chris Hoy, celebrity. Paul McGee, who's he? And as the publisher said to me, it's not personal, it's commercial. They're not going to stock your book. Now, I could easily wear the victim t-shirt, couldn't I? It's not fair. I could spend all my time and energy blaming other people for the fact that they've sided with a celebrity, even though probably my book, in all humility, and it was alluded to by the buyers, is a better book for kids. Or you can go, well, what does that do? Don't do anything. All right, I'm busy sending out invites to the pity party. But it's not going to help the book sell, is it? So what can I do? Well, I'm on social media at this SUMO guy on Twitter and Instagram. So I start to focus on promoting the book on social media, because people don't just buy books, obviously, through Smiths, but particularly through Amazon and Waterstones online. And you know what? I've written a book that became a Sunday Times bestseller. But out of my 13 books, the book that sold the most in its first 12 months of publication was my book aimed at kids. So I've learned in life, the victim t-shirt doesn't suit you. Are there genuine victims in life? Of course there are. Have I worked with genuine victims? Absolutely. But if they're going to grow through life, they have told me, Paul, it isn't helpful to see yourself as a victim and to have the identity of a victim. You have to start by going, okay, I was a victim. I'm now a survivor. And hopefully, ultimately, I'm going to thrive. I'm going to lead. I'm going to help others through what I've gone through.
So are you saying then that if you're going to change, then the first thing you need to do is identify yourself as playing that role? So if I was to want to improve my life, and I would have to identify the fact that I am playing victim. I know there's a section in your book, SUMO, which lists like a list of phrases that you might be using to identify whether you're playing victim, because I'm not sure people will always know. You know, people might be playing victim, but do they know they're playing victim? Because for me, it always seems the awareness is not there.
Sure. No, I totally agree that we don't always have awareness. I think for me, I want to kind of like maybe frame it in a slightly different way. Rather than go, stop being a victim, just say, take responsibility. I've got this formula in the book, E plus R equals O. Event plus response or reaction influences outcome. A lot of people, myself particularly, live life by a different formula for years. E equals O. If that's the event, you know what the outcome's going to be. It's the event plus my response or my reaction that influences the outcome. I'm in the equation. And it's about, you're not responsible for what happened to you. You're not responsible for certain events. You're not responsible for the fact that maybe things went really difficult for you in a pandemic. You're not responsible for that. You're not responsible that you might have had a difficult childhood. But you do become responsible for how you're going to move on from that. You know, if you woke up this morning, went downstairs, opened your front door, and someone's left a box of little puppies on your door step, no letter, just got, well, it's not your fault that you've suddenly landed with these puppies, but it is your responsibility for what's going to happen next. It's not your fault certain things happen to you. Sometimes it is because you made some stupid decisions, but sometimes it isn't your fault. But it is, I believe, our responsibility to decide, okay, that was the event. How do I now best respond or react to get a good outcome? Oh, and by the way, living particularly in a Western democracy with all the freedoms and opportunities we have, that's an event. It's a privilege that a lot of people on this planet don't have. I think it's our responsibility to make the most of that privilege, that event that we've got, to create some good outcomes, not just for ourselves, but for other people as well.
Yeah, I agree. Who've been your biggest influences since a young age? So who's helped shape and mold you into the Paul McGee that I'm speaking to today?
I think although I went through a very, very difficult childhood, and my mum wouldn't have always made the best decisions in life, my mum definitely shaped and influenced me. One of her key phrases we didn't really understand as a kid was "the world's your oyster." Well, I mean, I don't like fishy things, but the world's your oyster. And she was a very driven person. And so she's definitely shaped and influenced my life. A good friend of mine, Paul Sandham, came into my life when I was in my early 20s. And he was the one that really encouraged me with SUMO. You know, SUMO was rejected by 13 publishers. The Sunday Times best-selling book was rejected by 13 publishers. One publisher said, no one is going to buy a book that's telling you to shut up and move on. Now, they might now, because we've been loads of books do well now, they've got the F word in them. But the book came out, was hopefully coming out in 04, 05. And yet I remember going back to Paul, who was my mentor, and he just said to me, I think your SUMO stuff could really help a lot of people. So I think you need to push more doors. And I said, Paul, I've pushed loads of doors. He said, well, just try pushing a few more because you only need one to open. He was the guy that I worked with in Kibera, in the biggest African slum. And so he has definitely shaped and influenced my thinking. But I draw from loads of people, you know, from the early days of when I got into my personal development, listening to Zig Ziglar tapes, Jim Rohn, Anthony Robbins, a guy who's quite a spiritual thinker called Rob Bell also influences me. And now even people like Brené Brown and some doctors like Laurie Santos over in the States, Dr. Julie Shaw, who's a lot on Instagram. There's a lot of different people who continue to influence and inspire me. But I suppose if I had to choose two people, I think of my mum and I think of my mate Paul. But then ultimately, probably the person that has been my biggest strength and support would be my wife, Helen.
You referred earlier to faith. Were you talking in a religious aspect here where you tapped into faith to get you through some difficult times? Because that's, again, quite a common theme that I see. I've experienced that myself. Were you referring to faith?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was brought up, you know, as in a religious household, but it wasn't really a reality for me. And yet, in my struggles, I met some people who said they were Christians, and I'm like, well, yes, so am I. Isn't everybody born in Britain? And then, but I began to think their faith seemed a little bit different to mine. Now, I'm not a great fan of labels. And I'm very conscious that religion has done a lot of harm. I'm also conscious that people who meet some people who call themselves Christians can have some really negative experiences and therefore wipe it all out and dismiss it all. I'm also aware that some people, when you mention the word God, will still conjure up an image of a bloke on a cloud with a long beard. So there's a bit more complexity and nuance to faith, and I think sometimes people realize. But if I was just to look at the writings and the stories of this Jewish rabbi, Yeshua, who translate that into Greek is called Jesus, and you try and demystify the religious and all the preconditioned opinions and assumptions we have, and just try and look at sometimes how he was with other people, how he challenged religion, the religious authorities, how he challenged the oppressive Roman government, how he impacted women in such an incredibly positive way when they were seen as almost like, you know, dirt on someone's shoes. And he was someone who treated women with dignity, then yeah, whether you want to use the word religion, spiritual, Christianity, Judaism, whatever, I have also been profoundly impacted by this guy who lived 2,000 years ago, who remarkably some people still think, well, it didn't exist. And the New Testament's all made up and the Gospels don't have loads of contradictions. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard it. Look, let's be honest, Alex, if you and I have to do an account of this interview, we've done the same interview. We were together, we were chatting. And yet, if you've got to do a one-page account, you're going to pick up different things than I did. You might misremember what I said. I might misremember what you said. And so I've spent nearly 40 years studying faith. I don't like labels. My faith's evolved. It's more about behavior than simply beliefs. But yeah, faith has definitely continues to play a role in my life. And also, I fully understand why it doesn't with some people. And I also understand why people have loads of hang-ups about people who have a faith. But there is a phrase from the Old Testament that says, walk humbly, love mercy and kindness, and act with justice. And yeah, I want to walk humbly. I want to love mercy and kindness, and I want to act justly and love justice. So that's my kind of mantra. Take it or leave it. It's all good.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that. I think for me, it's the effect that it can have on behavior and framework and morals. So whether you believe in God or not, I think there's a good argument from Jordan Peterson who says that you probably should act as if there is one. Therefore, you're probably going to be a better person. You're probably going to try and do the right thing, and you're probably more likely to treat other people with more love than you would if there was no God.
Sure. I think there's a lot of, both from Christianity and other faiths, there is some ancient wisdom that actually we've been very dismissive of in the past, but I think we've become more receptive to. Ryan Holiday's work around Stoicism,
Yep.
and indeed Jordan Peterson, who often refers to the Bible. And it's very interesting, isn't it, that some people have been very arrogant and dismissive and very lacking in any real depth of understanding about faith issues, particularly people like Peterson, amongst men especially, have maybe opened the door to sort of like say, well, let's forget about labeling yourself and calling yourself religious or not, but let's have a rethink about this. Let's have a relook at it. Perhaps we'll see things differently than perhaps we've seen before.
Yeah. So I can't let you go, Paul, without speaking to you about the work that you did at Manchester City. If you've got time to talk about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, if I could, are we all right to have this as probably the wrap-up question?
Absolutely, yeah, that would be absolutely fine. For people,
or the wrap-up 1 or 2 questions, but probably
I've got to end with the better man. Yeah, so with the Man City case, when you hear people say, "Well, look, it's they've got tons of money, they're doing what they love. What possibly could they have to worry about? Why on earth would somebody need to go in there and work on their mental and emotional well-being?" Yeah, what's the answer? What kind of problems were you having the Manchester City team, players, staff work with?
Yeah, and well, I work with both players and with staff, and I work with family members as well. And I think the thing is that at the end of the day, one of their labels is they're a Premiership football with loads of money. But first of all, they're human. And you'd be surprised that there are some players who actually sometimes lacked confidence and a bit of self-belief. There were players who weren't always picked by the manager and fell out with the manager. And there were players who would also go, I'm having a nightmare with my girlfriend, or my wife's really struggling with so-and-so, or I've got an issue in my marriage, or I've got parents who've got health issues. And you're going to go, it doesn't suddenly, because you've got lots of money. It's like I was interviewed yesterday by Radio Scotland about lottery winners, and does that automatically make them happy? No, it doesn't. And I'd have players who'd say, my agent wants to do this, and I've got loads of people around me just telling me I'm wonderful and telling me what I want to hear. But they also, whenever I socialize with anybody, they always want me to pay because I'm rich and wealthy. And I wonder whether people are friends because of what I earn and my status, or because they like me. There were all kinds of issues with players. And there were players, I worked a lot with Patrick Vieira when he was managing the under-21s. And there were lots of young players who haven't made it. And, you know, and they'd have a struggle, they'd get a bad injury. And I remember one player who said, I've been sent to the top knee surgeon in Europe to help me with my knee injury. He said, but I've just got to look at the fact that my dream of being a professional footballer could have died here. And that you know, and so there was the emotional support that was often needed. So I became, I mean, so I think some people like to call me the performance coach, but I felt, you know, if I had a list of roles from being a counsellor, a confidant, a cheerleader, I challenged players as well about certain things. I did some presentation training with a lot of the staff. Sometimes I was just a bit of a sounding board. And I think one of the reasons why, even when Man City said, look, we've now set up a psychology department, so we kind of don't need you, because I'd had this kind of like free role, and we're going to be more formalised in how we do things. So you've been with us for 5 years. We've won the title for the first time in 44 years while you were involved. But you know what? We've got our own department now. And it's like, yeah, all good. Do you know what happened, Alex? Up until the pandemic, I still would get people contact me. And they'd say, look, I know you're not officially involved in the way you once were, but we trust you. And also, they like me. Because there are lots of sports psychologists, but it's not just about your knowledge, it's about the way you connect and engage with people. And some people are better at that than others. So I got involved in a wide range of roles at City, and it was, you know, and I've still got contact now with people who've moved on from the club but are still in football. People like Ben Mee, who's the captain at Burnley, who are hoping to stay up on the last game of the season. You know, there's a few as Shay Given, who's retired from football, but I helped him when he was doing a presentation for a charity that he set up when he was working and does work with Macmillan Cancer. So there's a lot of people either are still playing or have moved on. There's some who've even backroom staff who've moved to Liverpool, and yet I'm still in contact with them. And I think it's about relationship, and it's about your character as much as about your competence. You need both, but I think there's lots of people who are competent, but sometimes the character needs to also be there as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. I always think that depression, loneliness, struggle, they don't really care how much money you've got in your bank account anyway. So
absolutely.
So wrap up question then. Obviously the podcast is called The Better Man. A couple of things. What do you think more men need to do in order to create a better world? And secondly, what do you need to do or become better at?
Okay, what do men need to do to make a better world is just to, first of all, I go back to appreciate what they've already got, be kind to themselves and others, and start connecting with people and realize that fulfillment and success isn't a destination. It's not you get to that place and I'll be happy when. Mm-hmm. I'll be happy if. You can be happy now and still be ambitious. But if you can realize that this is a journey, it's not just about you, it's about us, it's about everyone. And if you can realize that in doing what you are good at, your gift, if you can use that gift also to benefit other people, that will be phenomenal. What do I need to do? What do I need to become better at? Getting less low when Wigan Athletic don't flipping win. And I'm being semi-serious about that. Yeah. I can allow a defeat of my football team to impact the next 2 or 3 hours of my evening. And I kind of want to thoroughly enjoy my football and enjoy watching Wigan Athletic still, but perhaps not be as quite emotionally invested as I have been. Because sometimes I don't actually like how it impacts me, because I'm almost like placing my happiness in the hands of someone else and I can't control what happens. And so I want to, I'm working on that.
Some people will think that's insane. I can totally relate. I stopped going to watch Coventry City Football Club because I realised I didn't enjoy any of it and I was just sat there like a bag of nerves. So yeah, stop watching football. Paul McGee, I appreciate you. I appreciate the time you've given up today to talk and answer my questions. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks, Alex. Cheers.
Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.